is one overlooked factor in the reading crisis today? I'm Dr. Emily Sherwood. For information about literacy from a global perspective, please like and subscribe. So I'm going to start this episode giving a story of Jill. And Jill was what most people would consider an ideal student. She was in the 8th grade. She had straight A's. She was mentioned by teachers as one of those students who may be valedictorian or salutatorian one day. If you're not from the United States, those are students who do the best in their class and are recognized. She was just considered a really great student by everyone. And Jill's parents were both local physicians in the community. And so Jill had a lot of opportunities that other students didn't have because her parents had money and this was a relatively poor community otherwise. But Jill's parents asked Taylor, who was a reading specialist and a teacher, to tutor Jill over the summer, and Taylor was a little bit confused about this. It seems like Jill's doing great, but they were concerned that perhaps she needed to accelerate her reading a little bit so that she could get into Ivy League college eventually. They wanted to make sure that she was really prepared for high school and the difficult classes, and that she eventually would have a good college career. So they asked Taylor to tutor Jill over the summer. Taylor found something very interesting. Taylor always gave an online leveling test. That means a test to find out the student's reading level. And it's usually a very quick test, and Taylor gave Jill the 8th grade test for the previous year because she was going to 9th grade. And Jill couldn't do it. She really struggled, and she sat there for about an hour just looking at this one passage that was about 3 pages and the questions. And this was really shocking to Taylor. She didn't know what was going on. Again, this is a very high-performing student. So when Taylor turned it down a little and just gave her a paragraph to read and answer the questions, she did very well. So Taylor determined that Jill had a problem with what we call stamina, which means reading long bits of text. And Jill is not unusual at all. In the last probably about 15 years, there have started to be a lot of problems with stamina. Students get shut down, they get exhausted, and this is considered a fluency problem, which means that students can't read automatically. That means they can't read, fairly quickly, and they can't read for long periods of time. They know how to decode. That means they know how to sound out words, but just reading for long periods of time is a very difficult problem. And we're seeing more and more of this in the United States. Since about 2019, I have noticed that just about every struggling student I've worked with has had this issue, no matter where they're from, what's going on with the student. Sometimes there are other issues. Sometimes the student has a hard time decoding. But I would say probably 80% of the students I've worked with over this time period have had this stamina issue. And before this time, I very rarely saw it. When I was teaching public school English as a second language in Northeast Tennessee, I can count on one hand the number of students who had a primary problem with this. Most of the students had problems with comprehension, that means understanding what they read, or with vocabulary. But the school system I was with did a pretty remarkable job at getting students to read long text. And that's not the case in most of the country of the United States, down really the world. And as I mentioned in other videos, we're having a decline in test scores globally. So what we're finding is that this is overall a very big societal problem. So how did this happen? Why are students struggling so much with reading long periods of text? There are a few reasons. We're not reading as much now as people used to in the past. People used to have to read just to get along with their daily lives, and people used to read books for news, for entertainment. Now those things have largely been taken over by TikTok, by YouTube, by Netflix, and people aren't reading as much. But it's also a school issue because starting in the early 2000s with No Child Left Behind and some other initiatives that were meant to help students succeed, schools started becoming very focused on standardized testing. And standardized testing usually, but the passages are usually very small. Not always, but generally speaking, they're very small. And this was actually mentioned in an article in The Week on October 15th, 2024. And what was noticed is that this idea that education has shifted to smaller text. And they actually did a survey, and they found that only 7 teachers now in grades 3 through 8 will do whole text, where students read a big long text. And almost 1/4 of teachers really don't use books at all in English language arts classes. It's using, again, short periods of text, or the lessons are very decoding focused, or they're focused on skills that may be easy to get quick results from, teaching students how to find maybe main idea in one sentence versus a whole text. And that's largely attributed to this change in educational policy. And one of the professors that was in this article, Adam Kotsko, he's a professor of literature, and he actually said that students are actively cannibalizing their educational experience in college, because colleges still require lots of reading. When I was in China, we were trying to encourage students to read and get students to read better, and we actually had a demonstration about a syllabus from Boston University for one course, and we got all that equaled about the pages numbers of these courses, and we put all the books that a student would have to read on a desk, and it was a huge pile. It was just, all probably 5 or 6 books. I think that it ended up being over 3,000 pages that were required for this one class. So students still need to read, and they need to read widely, and especially in colleges, students are really struggling with vocabulary and with comprehension, and just they're struggling. Students are struggling to read because they haven't read large texts. And again, these are students that are relatively high performing that go to college. Some pretty prestigious colleges are seeing this. And so there's this idea that we may become more of a listening society than a reading society. And that's going to be a huge shift, but it's also something that could really affect things like critical thinking and scholarship and academia in general, because again, reading is a big part of the college culture, and that's something that's not easily going away. And there's questions about, should it be going away? Because books are part of academic life, and it's how students get information. It's really, in many ways, one of the best ways students get information, especially for things like vocabulary, which is mentioned in this article. So I'm interested in hearing from you. Is this something that you're seeing in your school, with your children, if you're a parent, with students, if you're a teacher? I know I have some global viewers. Is this something you're seeing in your country? I'm interested in finding out more about this. What are you seeing in your schools, and what are the schools doing? Or what are you doing if you're a parent or a homeschool parent or a teacher? What are you doing to try to turn this around and promote reading? I would love to hear your comments about this. So if you have comments, please put them below. And until always, thank you so much, and keep learning.